Hello, my friends. Welcome to this art session. Together today, we will be designing and creating the cover to a journal. This journal can be a place where you accompany yourself in the weeks ahead as we prepare for the darkest day of the year and for the winter holidays. Lots of different feelings and thoughts come up for us typically around this time of year. Some of them really wonderful and some of them really hard. So this journal might just be a place where you can reflect on your experience and just be a loving witness to whatever's going on for you in this time. I also like to do art in my journal, and we will be making some art together if you want to follow along with other videos that I offer during this season. For now, for today, we're creating a cover that invites us into the depth of our own experience. I'm starting with black gesso, as you can see. And that's because there are real gifts even in the darkness. And there's something really remarkable when starting with a black surface and then creating right on top of it. And part of what I like about it is I like to create many layers, but have little bits of the black peeking through at the end. Being able to see some of the black on this base coat is actually part of what gives the cover its sense of depth and richness. You can see I used way too much black gesso, which is why I'm now putting it back in the container. You don't have to use quite as much as I did. But there's really no mistakes in creating this kind of art. So if you use more than you need to, feel free to just return some to your container as I've done. Also, if you don't have black gesso, of course you can certainly use white gesso or any other color paint. Gesso is my preferred way of starting because it has a really nice texture. It's a little bit chalky once it dries, so it's not too shiny, and it's a good surface that other art supplies can stick to really easily. So that's why I always start with gesso, especially on my covers, where I will be applying lots of different kinds of art supplies. Here I'm drying my cover before I move on. This can be an important step between layers on our journal. It helps us not create muddiness if we work on a completely dry surface. You can also always work in separate sessions. You could break up this workshop and do it on separate days or at separate times and just let your journal cover completely air dry between your sessions. Once your journal cover is completely dry, your next prompt is to write on your cover. And the things you are to write about are the things that you're carrying into this season. These might be things that are challenging, questions or struggles, memories, difficult emotions, but they'll also likely be gifts, blessings, resources that are helping you in this time. Maybe you have a friend who is being especially kind to you, or maybe you have really cozy pajamas that you love to wear this time of year. Or maybe you just have a few minutes every morning to yourself to have a cup of tea and you want to just dedicate that time to receiving nourishment. Whatever it is, just be aware that as we head into this darkest time of the year and we prepare for our winter holidays, we carry both gifts and burdens. So we're just noting, what do I carry? What do I carry as I go forward into this time of year? Once you've written down the things that you carry into this season, now it's just time to play a little bit with your next layer. Whatever doodles or marks you like to make, just go ahead and make them right on top of your words. I tend to like spirals and squiggles and loop-de-loops. Sometimes I like to just scribble, or I like making lines or dots. Whatever it is you like to doodle, and if you don't know, just play around. See what you like to make today. We're just enjoying the experience. Our next layer is going to be paint. We're going to apply paint right on top of the writing and the doodling we've already done. And we're going to start with a warm palette. And by warm, I mean reds, oranges, yellows. Here I have a purple, and I'm considering it a warm color because it's got more red tones than blue. So any colors that just feel warm to you when you look at them. Working in this way helps us not create mud. Our warm colors tend to blend well with each other and they don't get muddy. Same thing is true for our cool colors. So we're going to work first in a warm layer, and then we'll be working in a cool layer. And you can go back and forth between the two as many times as you want. I think I do 2 warm layers and 2 cool layers before I feel complete. But it's completely up to you when you feel done with this spread. So here I have my warm palette. So here I have my warm palette, and with a big flat brush, we're going to paint a few patches. They could either be rectangles or squares or just blobs. But the idea is to paint some patches of a warm color across your spread, across your cover. Now blend another warm color. Here I'm using a little red and a little purple to create an even warmer violet color. And we're going to just paint behind our shapes a little bit here and there, just filling in parts of the background. And you'll notice we're just covering right over our words and our doodles. This is by design. Now with a third color, we're going to cover over more of the background. Here I mixed a really beautiful color of orange. And I'm just creating little patches, filling in the background around my shapes. And now with yellow, I'm creating smaller patches of paint, and I'm overlapping a bit with some of the background colors or shapes that I already had down. You can see because I'm overlapping a bit, my colors are blending just a touch. That one yellow in particular got a little orangey. This is really fine with me. And because I'm working in warm colors, it's not too muddy. Even when they blend, they still retain a vibrancy to them. So now I'm just filling in more of the background between my shapes, still with my warm colors. Now, flip your brush around and scribble in your wet paint with the back of your brush. You could do doodles or shapes if you wanted. I sometimes just enjoy scribbling though, and the idea here is that we're showing the black underneath and probably a little bit of our writing too. Each layer that I add, I like to create little ways of peeking at the layers underneath. In the end, that's what gives a real rich color, a real rich textured visual appeal at the end. Here I'm just emptying paint from my brush onto this piece of paper. Sometimes I like to go back and collage with those pieces of paper on another project. Now with a smaller brush, go back in and get a full strength color. So rather than a color that's blended with gesso, get a full strength color and just create some little dots here and there around the page. Now we're just layering right on top of the patches of color that are underneath. And you can see it starts to add a rich quality because we can see multiple layers on the cover right now, all the way through to the black gesso underneath. So I just create some little clusters of dots or small marks here and there across the cover. Just paying attention to where it would feel good to see, and know that you can cover anything over that you don't like. Now I'm just filling in a few more of my patches of black that were showing through. I'm not quite sure why I decided to do that. You can certainly leave more black showing if that's what you prefer to do. But creating some more dots and little patches of color just adds another layer of interest. Still working in my warm palette, just blending new colors as I go. Once again, you can flip your brush around and make some marks in your wet paint. Here I'm doing some stripes in my yellow patches. I don't know how much of this will be visible in the end because I'm going to do many more layers on top of this, but all the texture really adds to the final effect. Next, we're going to make some marks on our journal. And because it wasn't completely dry yet, I grabbed my hair dryer and I'm simultaneously drying the page while making some marks. This process, this way of coming back in and making scribbles again in between layers of warm and cool colors of paint. This is prompts that are inspired by an artist I've been enjoying. Her name is Betty Franks. I'll have a link to her work below. The end result winds up being a different look than what her work is like, but her process I've really enjoyed. And some of my pieces end up looking more like hers than this one did. Getting inspired from other artists is a great, enjoyable way to learn. The whole way through, I'm just being led by my own sense of what feels good to see. We're following what I call the inner yes, that inner feeling of satisfaction when we're gazing upon something that feels just right to see. And here I'm taking little notes along the way about my process just so I can have it. Now, if you get to this point and you decide, I think I'm really happy with how this journal cover's looking, you could feel free to stop right now and call your project done. You'll see that I'm going to do several more layers. I'm going to do a cool layer of paint, and then I think another warm layer and another cool layer. with mark making in between. So I'm going to keep going for a while here. You can feel free to just follow along and do as many layers as I do, or you can stop at any point and call your cover done. Next, we're going to create a palette of cool colors. You'll see that I like to use thick paper sometimes for my palette, and this is because I later spread out any unused paint, and then I can use the paper once the paint's dry. Sometimes I like to collage with this paper in other art pieces. So I'm just choosing some colors of blue and green and yellow here as well. Another trick I learned from Betty Frank is that yellow blends well with both cool colors and warm colors. The exception is with purple. I don't tend to think that yellow blends well with purple. So if you've created a purple or you're using a purple, just maybe steer clear of the yellow unless you want a brown muddy color. That's what you'll get. So here, blues and greens, different shades. And then at the end, I'll add some yellow. Now I'm starting with a thin brush, and I'm just doing some scribbles and squiggles. And I think I even add some words in messy cursive right on top of my existing layers. You can try out different kinds of marks to make again. Here I'm doing circles, stripes, scribbles, words. Just getting more paint down on my cover. You can also try outlining some of the elements that you see from underneath. See, I've outlined a couple of my purple dots. If you see something on the underneath layer that you really love, you can circle it as a way to preserve it and know that you're not going to paint over that spot. But again, there's really no way to get this wrong. We're just playing. We're playing with color. We're playing with texture. And we're following our inner, yes. Bit by bit, moving from wherever we are toward that which gives us a little more joy, a little more satisfaction, intrigue, pleasure. We are led by joy in this process, which doesn't mean that there wouldn't be negative things to focus on. Certainly in any art project, at any moment, there's plenty on my spread that I don't like. It's not hard to notice what we don't like. It's a much trickier practice to notice what we do like, especially about our own art. So here with a thin brush, I'm filling in the background behind my blue marks And I'm flipping my brush around and I'm scratching into the wet paint. Again, so that I can peek through this wet layer to some of the richness and layered bits beneath. So filling in some background and then scratching the wet paint. Now mixing a different color, go in and paint more background. Now you could decide to leave more of the warm layer showing. I am covering up a fair amount of what's underneath, but you can make different choices. You could decide you want much, much more of the warm layer showing. As always, you're just following your own inner sense of what's interesting to try and what feels good to see. And there's no way to get it wrong. We can cover up anything with another layer of paint. And even if along the way we cover up something that we miss seeing, it's okay. We can just say goodbye to that previous layer we loved and keep going. Every time we notice what we love, we learn something about what our inner artist needs to see and delights in seeing. So even if we later cover it up, we've still benefited from noticing what we love. You see, I'm using this blue color to outline some of the shapes that I want to continue to see. And then I'm painting in some background as well with this blue color. See here, I circled a bit of that yellow. I knew I wanted to continue to see it, so I circled it to kind of remind myself not to paint in that area. Oh, I changed my mind. I think what I'm doing is I'm painting more and then scratching into it to just see little bits of the detail underneath. So if your cover reaches an awkward stage where you just really don't like it, don't worry. That happens many times along the way. There's always a way to add a little bit more of something I love. And usually if I keep going, keep following moment to moment the colors and shapes and textures and marks that would feel good to see, bit by bit I move toward an overall cover that feels good to me to look at. Remember, we're creating our very own visual medicine. The medicine, the soul medicine that we each need to see. So it doesn't matter if anybody else would like it or not like it. There's really no comparing. We're listening for that still, small voice inside that says, yes, this, more of this. It's a different kind of practice to listen internally in this way. We're so used to listening to voices outside of us. Or we listen to voices inside of us, like our impulses, and we just do what they say without reflection. Here we're just honing a new skill of self-noticing and choosing to move toward what nourishes. We're building our capacity for discernment as we work, as we paint. And you may slowly start to notice that your internal environment is shifting as you keep drawing your attention back to what you love, what's bringing pleasure, what feels interesting to see. The more you can allow yourself to linger with the sensation of receiving the color you love, the texture and shapes you love, the more we can learn to just drink in what feels good to see, the more we're rewiring our brain and our nervous system in the direction of nourishment, of joy. You'll notice I'm following very similar steps to what I did with the warm colors. Just adding some patches and dots of color, filling in the background, and then flipping the brush around and scraping a little bit of paint away here and there. And adding some more dots and marks. You can use these same prompts over and over. So notice as you're working how your body feels. Are you breathing? Are your shoulders relaxed? Could they drop down any more? Does your body want to breathe any more deeply? Just notice and stay with yourself. Stay with your experience. Outlining elements on the page helps them pop. Noticing what colors you love to see, and then giving yourself more of them, or more of that combination of colors, is a great way to nourish yourself. Here we get to trust completely what we love without judgment. One of my learnings early on in creating art in this way was to just so thoroughly trust what I love to see that I discovered I love a bunch of things that I used to have judgments about. I used to think it wasn't okay to love hearts, for example, or the color pink. I had these ideas about what was okay to enjoy visually and what wasn't okay. And so just give yourself permission to love what you love, no matter what it is. And what we love evolves when we can embrace it. Here I'm filling in a little bit more of the background behind some of my shapes. I'm creating these little areas where there's a little bit more simplicity. I'm covering up some of the background. And then I'm scraping into the wet paint with the back of my brush so that we can glimpse the deeper layers underneath this paint. These little glimpses to the depths and the texture that it creates all adds to the rich overall visual experience of the end result. Now I'm using a slightly different color. It's a little bit more green. And I'm painting some patches of color. Similar to the patches of color that I painted in pink on that very first layer. Having these smooth areas gives the eye a place to rest on an otherwise busy, textured, bordering on chaotic environment. You get to decide for yourself how much peacefulness, how many areas of simplicity do you need versus how much movement and variety and texture. Here I'm deciding to create some little bright spots in yellow, just for a little bit of pop, a little more contrast. I think later I wind up covering up much of this, but in the meantime I really enjoyed that little pop of color. And a little bit more over here. As you gaze at your spread, what parts of it delight you? So you might decide to stop after this layer. If you're pretty pleased with what the color cover looks like, you might just decide this is enough. You don't need any more layers. You'll see I'm going to go on and add another layer of warm colors, and it's going to change this cover considerably. But in the meantime, I'm scratching into some of my wet paint and adding a little bit more texture, which the next layer will pick up on even more. There are many points when you could stop in this process, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's really all in the journey. I apologize, my camera is the other direction here, You can also tell the lighting is a little bit different. I came back in the evening and worked on this spread some more. I'm going to go ahead and create a layer of warm colors on top of this cool color layer. But in keeping with the Betty Frank tradition, I am starting my new session by scribbling. I'm using a Stabilo crayon, but you could use oil pastel or pencil, colored pencil, charcoal. Adding this mark making adds another layer of complexity and depth and interest to a spread. Remember, you can circle elements. You can create shapes or just scribble, do doodles and lines. And now I'm going to add a layer of warm colors. So I created a palette again. You can see here I'm starting with some orange. And I'm going to wind up covering much of the spread. I'm working with what I already see on the page and creating some contrast. I'm really loving the orange against the green there, although I think much of the green will be covered over by the time this cover is complete. So circling elements that were already there, making them a little bit more of a focal point. And going in with some red, filling in some of the background around these shapes. Slowly, bit by bit, filling in more and more of the color with the warm layer. Now again, you don't have to cover so much of the spread or the cover with each layer. You could just leave it at this if you just want some warm spots that contrast to the cool background. I'm going to keep going and add more paint so that there's just little bits of the cool color showing through. But again, it's just a choice, and you can make the choice as you go. I think there are many points in this project when I could have been really fine with calling it done, but I just wanted to explore what happens if I keep going. What happens if I just keep adding texture and layer and switching up the warm and cool colors? So it's all an exploration, and it's all a learning, and it's all as much about the process as it is about the product or the outcome. I have now in this moment all but forgotten the things I carry that I originally wrote down on the inside, on the cover when the background was just black and I used a Stabilo crayon to do some writing there. I'm not thinking about those things or aware of those things at all, and yet I know that on some level my brain, my being, is sorting out those questions, receiving those gifts. This is a more restful way of working with the challenges in our life. We're not actively pushing to arrive at solutions. But we're waking up our creative mind, and by working on the same surface on top of where we put the questions, we're just shifting to a different part of our brain. And we're bringing resources from the resourced part of our brain to the challenges, to the questions and the struggles. I've never not noticed a shift when I do the art on top of some reflection or area of struggle that I'm working with in my life. So all of this is just helping us drop down into our own depths. There's something profoundly integrating and organizing about creating intuitive art in this way as part of an intentional practice to self-connect. So just keep breathing and noticing and letting yourself enjoy what you enjoy. You see, in purple, I'm creating this large, rounded square shape. I think I was trying to do something quite different on this cover, and I wanted a little bit of it to show on the back cover and then most of it to show on the front. And then in order to make the line less severe, I went in and scraped it with the back of my brush. From close up you can tell even more that it just makes the line a little less severe if it's broken up a bit. Now with a slightly paler purple, I'm going in and circling some elements and filling in the background a little bit, helping these other elements on the spread to fit with or work with this purple box. And again, I'm using the back of my brush to circle and scratch into my wet paint. Again, adding more texture. I'm going to keep going here, and you can keep going on your spread as long as you care to. You'll see if you keep watching that I'm going to add more and more warm colors until I've covered much of this surface again. But there'll be little bits of cool color and even little bits of black that show through from deep within the layers of this piece. I was really lingering and taking my time here, so I have sped up this portion of the video just so you can see the progression of the piece without having to sit through it in real time. You can keep following the prompts. I'm continuing to use the same simple prompts of putting down blocks or patches of color, putting down shapes, big dots, lines, outlines, and then scratching into my wet paint with the back of my brush. Just intuitively lightening and then darkening, intuitively choosing some areas to simplify by creating blocks of more similar texture and color, and then I'm adding more complexity again by adding in more detail, more refinement. So this is an intuitive process. I'm finding the balance that feels really good to me today, and it could be very different on a different day. Here I'm sitting down with what I think is my third session working on this cover. And I'm going to start this session the way I start many sessions, by drawing, mark making in pencil and Stabilo crayon, maybe some oil pastel. These marks are a way of just making contact with my surface, getting the feel for creating again, enjoying the texture, enjoying the sensation of the instrument on the page. I like to start every new art session with some mark making. I learned this from Betty Frank. Really enjoyable way to start a spread. Again, this could have been a fine place to stop. But I just chose to continue. I'm doing another layer of cool colored paints, and I'm changing the look and feel of the cover yet again. You'll notice that with each additional layer, you can still see some touches and elements of the layers underneath. And it just adds to the richness and the depth. The longer I keep working, the more layers I add. Sometimes I take pictures between the layers. Before I add another layer, I stop and take a picture just so I can enjoy the progression of the spread later, and so that I have a document of a spread before I alter it. And it does happen that sometimes I like earlier versions or earlier layers more than the end result, but it's rare. Usually by the time I've finished with a piece, I'm so pleased with the layers and the degree of refinement that I've arrived at from just continuing to add more layers of cool and then warm, cool and then warm, mark making, shapes and lines, filling in the background. Just keep exploring and keep noticing yourself and what you enjoy, what your inner artist says, ah, yes, to on your page. You notice I am using a fairly dry brush, meaning I'm not dipping my brush in water. I'm using fairly dry paint, and that has a scumbling effect. It means that I can see the deeper layers through the layer of paint. It adds to texture. I'm speeding the video up again because once again I was really enjoying this process and decided to just linger and move slowly. I'm not sure how long I spent working on this cover in all, but you will see that it has gone through many iterations before I'm done. So just watch it evolve, and you can create right along with me as I create this video. Or you can speed up and watch all the way through to the end and then start your project on your own. Either way, make use of this video and this list of prompts in whatever way serves your creative process. Know that as you're working on your cover, this is all part of creating a space for yourself in this season. and creating space for whatever the holy is creating in you. For whenever we create, whenever we engage in anything creative, we are also being created by the act of creating. It's an inherently spiritual process which connects us to the great creator that created us and creates us anew each day. And this, my friends, is my journal for December 2021. Preparing the way for the dark, preparing the way for the light. Have fun.